Some of you have probably heard that Cuba might change its constitution. As of recording this video, the constitutional amendments are being discussed by the citizens of Cuba, who are going to feed back suggestions to the parliament, until eventually the public will vote either to accept or reject the new constitution. In this constitutional draft, there is an article which recognizes the existence of privately owned property on the island of Cuba. This has caused some Western media journalists to speculate that Cuba is preparing to abandon socialism altogether and return to the capitalist utopia that was the 1950s. If you want capitalism to return to Cuba, then you're probably going to be disappointed to learn that Cuba is holding on to socialism just as firmly now as 20 years ago, if not more. Privately owned property has existed on Cuba for many years, only it's never been officially recognized. The Secretary of the Council of State, Homero Acosta, insists that recognizing private property is the only way to control it. In other words, the first step to recovery is admitting that you have a problem. Under this new constitution, if it passes the popular vote, Cuba will also start officially accepting foreign investments, which will also be tightly under the control of the central government. But while the new constitution recognizes worker cooperatives, small private businesses, and mixed ownership, it also states that public property, i.e. state enterprise, is the most important and most fundamental part of the Cuban economy, and the state's control and leading role shall not be compromised, even in relation to non-publicly owned property. Cuba is also looking to bring back the old position of Prime Minister, essentially cutting the duties and responsibilities of the president in half, ensuring that no one person can have too much power. Cuba will also bring back term limits both for the role of Prime Minister as well as the role of President, limiting a single person to a maximum of 2 terms in either office. The new Cuban constitution also formalizes some rights which have in practice already existed for many decades, namely the right to free public healthcare, the right to a decent home, the right to free education from preschool to university, and the right to a job for adults. Children and teenagers are still forbidden by law from working, but once you're 18 you have the right to a job if you want one. You can also of course choose to not work if that's what you want to do. And whether you work or not, you still have the right to education, to healthcare, and to a house or apartment to live in. Regardless of who you are, regardless if you work or not, those are fundamental rights for every citizen. The new constitution will also change the definition of marriage from being a union between a man and a woman to being a union between 2 people, which means that same-sex marriage will become legal in Cuba, making it the only nation, not counting overseas territories, in the Caribbean to legalize gay marriage. This is most likely due to Mariela Castro Espin, the daughter of the former Cuban president Raúl Castro, who is the director of the Cuban National Center for Sex Education in Havana and an activist for LGBT rights in Cuba. The National Center for Sex Education is a government-funded body in Cuba. The center is best known for advocating tolerance of LGBT issues on the island. The center stresses acceptance of sexual diversity and has attracted international attention in recent years for its campaigns for the rights of transgender persons, including the recognition of an individual's gender identity regardless of birth sex, and provision of state-funded sexual reassignment surgery. The center's mission is to contribute to the, quote, development of a culture of sexuality that is full, pleasurable, and responsible, as well as to promote the full exercise of sexual rights. Another thing that some people are in an uproar about is the fact that the new Cuban constitution doesn't mention the word communism. This in no way means that Cuba is abandoning its goal of a classless, stateless society, but rather it's recognizing that communism is a long-term goal, not a short-term one. A constitution is meant to reflect and regulate existing conditions, not write out goals for the future. Those are meant for the party constitution. Then there's also the question of if a single country can become communist by itself in the age of capitalist imperialism. As the Communist Party of Cuba is Marxist-Leninist, their answer to this question is no. Communism can only come about when socialism has taken over as the dominant mode of production in the world. Until that happens, Cuba will be focusing on defending their currently existing socialist mode of production rather than trying to build communism on their tiny, embargoed island nation. Simply put, communism is not a realistic short-term goal for Cuba and thus has no place being in the constitution of the republic, but rather it is in the constitution of the party. So, is Cuba returning to capitalism? It seems very unlikely. If you'd like to learn more about Cuba and its political system, I made a video called How Democracy Works in Cuba, which I recommend you watch. Thank you for watching this video. You can now click away.